total degenerate, was Einstein, but he was propped up to keep people's attention on the false path. And the true path is not just a scientific concept, it is very much entwined with spiritual concept. The ancient Egyptians were talking about Fohat, the electric force that creates the universe and as well as consciousness. Hello everybody, I'm Mango Thunderslice, and today is Ether Physics 203, Don't Believe What They Tell You. And this is about black holes. We're going to talk a little bit more about flat Earth and, you know, the electric universe, and essentially just the entire new paradigm of science that is coming into focus. And over the course of the next decade, we're really going to see this conflict become more primary. I've been one of the few people on the internet who's actually been talking about this for several years. It's still a small crew on this channel because only a few people actually have the intuition and the intelligence to find themselves pointed in this direction. But for those who will travel along the path to its inevitable conclusion of the existing paradigm, this is where it leads you, is questioning the nature of gravity, questioning the nature of space-time and the universe itself, whether or not there is something like a luminiferous ether that was discarded over a century ago. Perhaps we've eliminated certain possibilities in error. Perhaps we've overlooked certain aspects of reality and kind of poo-pooed them, or sort of just tried to shoehorn them into the existing theories, because there's so much momentum at this point. There's hundreds of billions of dollars spent every single year just on machines premised on relativity. Most of them don't produce anything at all. Most of them are giant, pork projects. They're just money being spent for the sake of the agencies just having something to show for it, even if they have to make something up entirely and, kind of get enthusiastic about otherwise unenthusiastic results, so to speak. One of those, of course, is the LIGO experiment, Large Interferometer, I forget what the GO is, Gravitational Observatory. And it's basically a giant laser interferometer, right? And we've talked about interferometers a lot on this channel for years. This is essentially using an optical interferometer, is how Dayton Miller back in 1933 disproved relativity by proving the anisotropy of the speed of light, which is to say that the speed of light changes relative to the sidereal calendar, which is the Earth's position around the sun. So there's certain positioning of the Earth around the sun where speed travels slower or faster on a very small scale. And this was recorded using an optical interferometer on Mount Wilson here in California back in the 30s. And we just, that apparently just got swept under the rug. The results got discarded as, an example of a heat variation. The funny thing is, as I pointed out, I believe in Ether Physics 202, was that the accuracy of Dayton Miller's results was several orders of magnitude more precise than the accuracy of the results of the 1919 Arthur Eddington eclipse, which supposedly is what verified relativity as put forth by Einstein. Which is to say, they say they measured the deflection of light around the sun from a star behind the sun during a solar eclipse. And this was again in 1919. Think of the technology today, right? We can record a lot of these things in the heavens with a lot of accuracy, but think of what existed back in 1919. They had these photo plates. There were clouds obscuring the sun. We didn't have multiple, computer high-resolution observatories all over the world back then. It was just him down in South Africa with some photo plates trying to take these pictures. Then not even remotely close to capable was this experiment designed to capturing the results on the order of precision that he claims, which was 1/100th of 1 arc second of deflection, okay, which is an extremely small amount of deflection. There's a lot of these super small and super big numbers in relativity that just baffle the mediocre-minded and get them thinking that this is really the most intelligent thing that the universe has ever produced, or any human has ever produced, on the nature of the universe. And It's just funny. Again, it's mediocre minds that fall for it. I know a lot of people, super nerdy people, that are all gung-ho about relativity and Einstein. And the reason that I kind of got into this was when the LIGO observatory, when LIGO announced their results. This was back in 2016, saying they discovered gravitational waves. I knew people, and this was, I was already banned from Facebook at this point, but just through looking at Space Panther's Facebook, people were literally losing their shit. They were going gaga over the discovery of gravitational waves. Like, I'm literally shaking right now. Oh my god, gravitational waves, Einstein. It's all bullshit. They discovered nothing. We're going to talk about that here in a second, but it's just hilarious that the amount of critical thinking and skepticism that these people employ with regards to religious concepts, which they really don't spend any real good faith effort, trying to understand certain religious concepts. They just put them in a box and then discard the box, right? Like they do with many other things. The arguments against, not even arguments against vaccines, arguments against the current regime of vaccines, because when you really start to research vaccine safety, you realize there are some gaping holes. And a lot of things we've been sold as fact are in fact just narrative. And that is the same in politics, it's the same in science. It goes from relativity, it goes to global warming, it goes to, again, the vaccine issue. 5G network that they're rolling out now, the nature of electromagnetic technology is itself premised on these topics that we're talking about, ether physics. If we presume that the man and his body is just a material construction, and it does not have an etheric existence, we already, even within the biochemical material frame, we know that there's things like the circadian rhythm. We know that there's things like the Schumann resonance. And if you take humans and you put them in an electrically isolated environment where there is no Schumann resonance, which for those who don't know is the pulse of the Earth, it's somewhere between like 11-15 hertz, right, cycles per second. If you put people in an environment where that signal is not present, people will start to lose their mind. They will go insane. And, it's similar to when you deprive people of sleep, right? You cannot go infinite amount of time without sleeping, or you will start to lose your mind and eventually you will just die. And why is that the case? Why, if we are just material beings who have only got to this point out of evolution and not being eaten by a bigger animal, why does something like that exist? Why do we have this innate connection to, the electric environment? Why do we have electric, cycles within ourselves? And of course, even within the frame that we're taught, what is chemistry? What is biology? It is basically a number of different processes which are premised on chemistry. What is chemistry? It's a number of different molecules, each of which have different charges, plus and minus electrical charges that allows them to configure themselves using ionic and covalent bonds into all the different compounds we know today that make up our physical world. Right? So the entire premise of the frame that we're even instructed in is premised on electricity. That again gets poo-pooed when we start, looking at the electric nature and focusing in on that and thinking of things of the ether as a universal medium for all of these things to be taking place. Consciousness, again, has no real explanation in the material frame. It's this anomaly that just, again, gets shuffled under the rug and poo-pooed and all the rest. But at a certain point, 7 billion humans deep, you can't really discard these things anymore. And especially with the rise of Asia, and they don't have the same cult of Einstein, right? They're looking for whatever the best technological engineering solution is. They don't have any cult of personality with this crazy-haired, old Jewish guy sticking out his tongue, who was, among other things, a pedo who married his cousin, right? Total degenerate was Einstein, but he was propped up to keep people's attention on the false path so that the true path would win. And the true path is not just a scientific concept; it is very much entwined with spiritual concepts, right? The ancient Egyptians were talking about Fohat, and the electric force that creates the universe and as well as consciousness. So anyway, we'll get started. Here's a picture of what they think is a black hole, right? Very entrancing. I think they used this image and this program that was developed by these people in these computer-generated image labs in, what was the movie, Interstellar, which I thought was a great movie. I still think is a pretty good movie. And I was blown away by it, and then I started really thinking about it. In this movie, they supposedly represent relativistic planets, where the gravity is all crazy and these planets orbiting a black hole, and it's very, fascinating and, a riveting movie. But the more that I thought about it, I realized it's ridiculous. It just doesn't quite make sense that time is just this Play-Doh that we can play with with different velocities. It's just, and I didn't really have the acumen and the verbiage to disprove it at that point. I hadn't done the research, right? Starts to feel a feeling, but he hasn't seen the sites. I decided to go and see the sites and do the research. And, well, yeah, when people get deep in this, if they have weak, mediocre mind, they become a flat earther, unfortunately. And the reason that flat Earth has been rolled out is specifically as a psyop to distract people from things like the electric universe and the etheric, to things like ether physics, because it is very much the engineering concepts of what we're calling free energy is absolutely tied to the idea of a limitless sea of energy in which we are inhabiting, that we can essentially convert or put to work, which is to say, convert into usable energy. And these things are not allowed to come to the forefront, even though they have already been developed by several very smart humans on this planet, specifically because it would disrupt the entire economic paradigm. And, one of my lifetime goals is to actually construct a free energy device and to learn about these things well enough and to build up enough capital reserves, disposable capital in a sense, to actually put into these experiments and these engineering projects. I'm not an engineer, but, I find that I can usually figure things out when I put my mind to it. And one person who has become a flat earther in the last year is Owen Benjamin. Right, and when I first encountered Owen Benjamin's work, I thought he was really funny. I enjoyed his comedy because it was a very refreshing relief from the universal leftism that has now taken over comedy, where no one can even be funny anymore because it's all just part of the Hollywood liberal program. They're all in complete defense mode because of Trump, right? Again, Hollywood doesn't want the feds to come in and basically just throw all the pedos in jail, so they've got to just create this set of cultural wars and illusions. And one of them is the flat earth, right? They've concocted flat earth to entrap stupid people and make it seem like anybody who questions the scientific dogma of our day is an absolute nutcase and a moron, right? And of course, you're not a moron and a nutcase to, be skeptical about things like vaccine safety. You're not a nutcase and a moron to look closely at the basis of relativity and see that it is a joke and that a lot of the experiments conducted have been confirmatory, designed to be confirmatory, right? They're self-referential and they're not actually challenging the basis of the theory. Especially when a lot of the etheric concepts, they overlap a lot with the math that relativity uses, but the logic that they're based on are fundamentally different. The logic of relativity is ridiculous. The logic of the ether is perfect, as far as I can tell. And so Owen Benjamin has gone a little crazy off the deep end over the last year. He got kicked off of Facebook, he got kicked off of YouTube recently, and it makes me wonder also again, how much of everything that, how many operators within our sphere are, astroturfed, how many are MK Ultra, and how deep does this narrative management go? But in any case, the light of logic will shine through. But I think that this clip from Anthony Cumia's show is just a good example of how flat Earth gets used to dismiss a whole bunch of things and that are legitimate. Flat Earth is like this poisoned seed in this barrel of otherwise, scientific conspiracies that are true, right? Global warming is bullshit, right? Relativity is bullshit. Vaccines are bullshit. But the Earth is not flat. It's not. And to those of you who watch the show, much love to you. It's just not the case. And when I say that you're of low intelligence for believing that, it's not like me insulting you. I'm just saying that if you really think that the Michelson-Morley experiment proved that the Earth is not spinning, you have absolutely no idea what that study was or what it was testing. You simply do not have any idea. You're walking around claiming it because other people told you this. So this is why the title of this is Don't Believe What They Tell You. Whether you believe in global warming, whether you believe in flat Earth, whether you believe in vaccines, Don't believe what they tell you. Verify it for yourself, and don't go to the existing... Go to the people who disagree with you and listen to their best argument. Find the most credible person who disagrees with you and listen with full intent and good faith. That is the way to actually become more educated, no matter what you believe. A flat earth or global warming, even if you think that I'm right about everything that I say, right? Don't believe what I say. Go and investigate these things for yourself. Become more educated on your own dime. And find the truth for yourself. I'm not a guru. I don't want to be a guru. You should not be hanging on my every word as if it's the gospel truth. I do my best to speak the truth, but I am fallible like any other man, right? And so you do not believe what they tell you. Go and find. And this section from Anthony Cumia is interesting. So we'll just go ahead and play it for a few minutes.
Every week, it's like a few hours long, and they talk about flat Earth, and they make fun of scientists and physicists as they debunk these globebuster guys, and they have nothing. It's like their argument a lot of times is a scientist will talk about gravity and the formulas behind it, and the scientists many years ago that proved that gravity is a thing, and it's a force, and it's created by mass, and they'll just go, "Oh, really, gravity?" And you're like, well, that isn't an argument. You can't just poo-poo gravity. How about an argument? How about a debate? What you think it is. And there were a few things that were hilarious. Again, I could sit and try to debunk it, but it's nuts. They actually believe that gravity is a electromagnetic force. Like, literally. Take a balloon, rub it in your head, and take confetti, and it'll stick to the balloon. They think that's how you stick to the flat Earth. Like, they had to come up with something, and that's what it is. They have to come up with something, so they come up with anything. And it's so off base and implausible when placed next to the science that says we're a sphere with gravity pulling in all directions of a sphere. It just doesn't make sense any other way. But again, to argue it is silly. And I watch so many scientists debunking point by point their beliefs in the flat Earth. And it's so funny to watch because the scientists are so prepared, and they have science behind it, a history, a long history. The Greeks knew that Earth was round, was a sphere, thousands of years ago.
All right, and yeah, the main point there that I really got struck with, I'll make fun of the flat earthers in a sense and the things that they believe because they are so illogical and ridiculous. But then he says, and one of the things they claim is that gravity is an electromagnetic force. And, basically he's like, gravity is he says, contrary to what the, flat earthers are claiming about, there's 1,000 different pseudo explanations of what gravity is in the flat earth realm. But he's like, gravity is a force, right? We can measure it. And it's caused by mass, right? Well, actually, first of all, in the relativistic realm, gravity is not a force. Gravity is a curvature of space-time, right? Whatever that means, right? Gravity would be very explainable as a force, right? Something, if gravity as an electromagnetic force is actually very defensible, especially when you listen to electrical engineers like Wal Thornhill. I think he's an electrical engineer. He's like professor of electrical engineering or something. But this was from 2015 at the Electric Universe conference. And, it is called Wal Thornhill, The Long Path to Understanding Gravity. I'll put a link in the description down below. And, he basically enunciates the electric model of gravity. We're positing, so what causes gravity, right? Atomic electrostatic dipoles are formed by most atoms inside the Earth, with the inner pole positive and the outer pole negative. The electric field produced within the atom distorts the subatomic particles to also form infinitesimal electric dipoles. It is the sum of all the aligned subatomic dipoles that produces the profoundly weak force of gravity. Gravity cannot be shielded electrically because the dipole force is daisy-chained through matter. Now, I know that Anthony Cumia is a very, very smart and educated man drinking his Budweiser there at Compound Media, but I have to say I'm a little more swayed by Wal Thornhill and the electric mode of gravity. Again, especially when the explanation for gravity in our current scientific worldview is just the curvature of space-time, and that just simply does not make actual sense. It's not engineerable. It doesn't produce any scientific, technological revolution when you just say, oh, it's a curvature of space-time. It's functionally useless. Gravity in the electric universe. All right, this is another one from the Thunderbolts project. And in this one, I've brought this up in several previous videos, that the speed of gravity is instantaneous. Right, the Earth is not pulled to where the sun, right, it takes 8.3 minutes for light to get to the Earth, but the Earth is pulled gravitationally not to where the sun was 8.3 minutes ago, but where it is instantly. So it's pulled to where the sun is, like almost forward into the sky from where we see, because the light hasn't hit us yet. So essentially gravity is faster than light. It is instantaneous. So gravity itself disproves relativity, because it is a actionable force. It is energy essentially sent faster than the speed of light, which is not supposed to be possible in relativity. Again, many self-contradictory aspects that if you point out, they'll just be like, well, relativity, meh. And here's a relativistic answer for that doesn't make any sense and is self-referential. It's like, okay, cool, bud. Like, you're a cult member and you're not a scientist if that's the way that you act. If you don't treat good faith challenges with good faith responses and with argument and debate, robust, conversation, and you just say, well, meh, we already talked about that 100 years ago, and we already know that it's not worth talking about. It's like, no, you don't. You're assuming. And maybe you're getting paid to assume. Maybe you're just a loser who believes what you're told. Maybe you work for NASA and you're thoroughly indoctrinated in this stuff. I don't really care. I have no incentive and no investment in the old world at this point. I'm looking forward to the new engineering forces, the new engineering of forces into technology over the coming decade and century, including free energy. And I want my own flying saucer. That's what I'm about. I want to build an airship one way or another, even if it's just a dirigible. But I like to also have a flying saucer, right? I got 100 years ahead of me, and, well, we'll make it happen. So gravitational waves, returning to this, the original, even before I started the first ether physics video, again, was my video where I was far less, a student making videos back then, but even then I realized that this whole gravitational wave thing was a total joke, and LIGO was a giant waste of money. And it's interesting as an engineering thing, right? A 4-kilometer long vacuum tube, and we could theoretically get some really valuable data out of this, but they're using a bullshit model, and so all of their results are interpreted through this nonsensical filter of relativity and black holes and the rest of it. So we're just going to read this real quick. This is also from the Thunderbolts project from just about a month earlier in December, and it's titled Gravitational Waves. Space and time are not a fabric. In Einstein's vision of the universe, time and space are dynamic regions under constant change because matter creates warps or curves in both. Today, its interpretation views the universe as a kind of geometric object that exists in a 4-dimensional matrix. 3 space coordinates and 1 time coordinate are necessary in order to define a particle's world line through history. If the universe is considered as a whole, with all time and all space contained within a sphere that exists in a higher 5-dimensional environment, then all events are there from start to finish. Each event or object traces a line that stretches through reality from past to future, indicating its position in space at every instant in time. This view was originally proposed by Hermann Minkowski, Einstein's professor at the Zurich Polytechnic. Minkowski thought that the theory of relativity proved that all objects are really 4-dimensional in a framework that is now called Minkowski spacetime. And here's a quote: "A point of space at a point of time, that is, a system of values, x, y, x, t, I will call a world point. The multiplicity of all thinkable x, y, x, t systems of values we will christen the world. Not to leave a yawning void anywhere, we will imagine that everywhere and every when there is something perceptible. Let the variations dx, dy, dz of the space coordinates of this substantial point correspond to a time element dt. Then we obtain, as an image, so to speak, of the everlasting career of the substantial point, a curve in the world, a world line, the points of which can be referred unequivocally to the parameter t from negative 00 to positive 00. The whole universe is seen to resolve itself into similar world lines, and I would fain anticipate myself by saying that in my opinion physical laws might find their most perfect expression as a reciprocal relation between these world lines. End quote. Hermann Minkowski, Space and Time, in Hendrik Lorentz, Albert Einstein, Hermann Minkowski, and Hermann Weyl, The Principle of Relativity, a collection of original memoirs on the special and general theory of relativity. How's that for a title? Continuing. As mentioned, it is from Minkowski that the space-time continuum postulate was derived. Such a view causes many problems, but after decades of debate and analysis, those problems remain unresolved. For example, there can be no flow of time since all objects in space-time happen in a perpetual now. The universe must therefore be absolutely deterministic, since there is no past or future. From a philosophical standpoint, there can be no free will. Every decision, every action is already extant in its world line. Here's another quote. The views of space and time which I wish to lay before you have sprung from the soil of experimental physics, and therein lies their strength. They are radical. Henceforth, space by itself and time by itself are doomed to fade away into mere shadows, and only a kind of union of the two will preserve an independent reality. End quote. Speech given to the 80th Assembly of German Natural Scientists and Physicians, Cologne, September 21st, 1908. All particles are said to be nested inside individual distortions of spacetime called warps. The common description of this condition relies on visualizing a sheet of stretched rubber with a bowling ball resting on the surface. The bowling ball forms a dimple in the rubber sheet, supposedly illustrating how the sun, or some other massive object, creates a bubble of distortion in 3 dimensions. This information is necessary in order to understand what the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory, LIGO, is all about. Gravity is not a force in Minkowski spacetime, it is curvature through a 5-dimensional representation. Using the sun and a rubber sheet analogy, any object approaching the sun in its dimple will follow a curved path around it. The closer to the sun, the steeper the curve, therefore the more dramatic its influence on the object. No forces are involved, only space-time warped by matter. In the 4-dimensional universe, scientists think that the same principle applies. Objects follow curved paths because of space-time distortions. For more than 100 years, modern science has been on a quest to confirm this principle of warped space-time. In consensus circles, it is assumed that enough matter with enough density can create ripples in space-time. Assume some entity, such as a star, with tremendous inertial mass, collapsing at the end of its life into a black hole. One moment it is there, and the next moment it is not there. What happens to its dimple in space-time? This is where gravitational waves come into play. As the star leaves the continuum, the laws of physics, including general relativity, are not applicable to black holes, so there is no way to describe them in Minkowski spacetime except to say that they can no longer communicate in any way with the continuum. Its dimple also collapses. If the bottom of a body of water suddenly drops, it causes the water's surface to ripple, forming waves that spread out from the center. That is the principle of gravity waves, inertial mass collapse, not matter, mass, in a 4-dimensional bubble of spacetime. The entire continuum vibrates as the idea suggests. LIGO is said to measure ripples instigated by the vibration in spacetime as they pass through the Earth. What effect are those ripples supposed to cause? An expansion of the planet smaller than 1/10,000th the diameter of a proton, 10 to the negative 19 meters. In the case of LIGO, it is not the birth of a black hole, but the merger of 2 black holes that is thought to have formed the signal that it detected. It is not the intent of this paper to prove or disprove the existence of black holes. That was done numerous times, especially in presentations given by Stephen Crothers. It is imperative, however, to understand what is going on in the minds of theoretical physicists. It is assumption upon assumption, building theories on the backs of other theories that can provide no experimental evidence. LIGO is not announcing some new principle of physics. It is announcing the confirmation of computer models fashioned according to presumptions. If black holes do not exist, there is no gravitational wave detection. What was detected? Seismic noise is a problem because the detector is near an interstate highway and a rail line. When trains went by, the interferometer was knocked out. Nearby logging is also a continuing problem. The team claims that dampening and filtering systems solve those issues. The laser mirrors deteriorated, requiring 2 of them to be removed and replaced. Wasps made nests in the beam tubes. Their waste caused a leak in the vacuum system. The wasps were evicted. The point here is that LIGO is a device concept that is rife with potentially fatal flaws. Were all of those flaws, as well as others, fully rectified? The major premise is that black holes do not exist, despite the logical fallacy that claims they do. So yeah, and if you want to be a true believer and believe that a 4-kilometer long vacuum tube that was near a highway and had all of those issues and probably much more that we don't even know about was able to detect the changing of the planet's diameter smaller than 1/10,000th the diameter of a proton, well then cheers to you, brother. There is nothing I will do to change your mind, because you are more hardcore than the Jesuit priests are as far as commitments to a cultish religion. So I'll just leave you right there at that bus station, and we'll keep rolling on along to ether physics truth. So continuing, these are some of the links that were featured at the end of that article, right? Supermassive problems with black holes. We'll read this one. So it was supermassive problems with black holes. This was from 2009, so this is from 10 years ago. So Anthony Cumia, again, super smart guy, knows that gravity is a force, right? He actually has no idea what he's talking about. He doesn't even know that in the current model, gravity isn't considered a force. It's considered a warping of space-time, whatever that means. But anyway, in the electric universe, it is a force. It's an electromagnetic force. So Anthony Cumia at once conveys his own ignorance and then basically tosses aside the correct conception because it's affiliation with flat earthers, right? And so why again are flat earthers claiming electromagnetic gravity? Because the entire thing is a psyop designed to discredit the people who are questioning the Einsteinian relativistic worldview, and therefore getting close to the technological engineering solutions of free energy. Yes, that, I guess, sounds crazy, but does it sound crazier than trying to measure the width of the planet changing by 1/10,000th of the diameter of a proton in a giant laser tube filled with wasps? I'll leave that to you, my friends. Continuing with this article, or starting, I guess. A gravitational point source more than 70 million times the mass of the Sun is theorized to inhabit this galactic core. Are scientists misinterpreting their own observations? In a recent press release from the Chandra X-ray Observatory, astronomers announced that black holes exhibit similar behavior regardless of their mass. Whether they are 10 times the mass of a typical star or many millions of times more massive, they tear matter apart and forcefully draw it into unknown regions where the so-called physical laws of our universe no longer apply. Black holes are said to cause space and time itself to twist and warp so that the past becomes the future and velocity calculations yield impossible solutions. Matter inside of a black hole occupies no volume at all, yet retains gravitational acceleration so great that not even light can escape its attraction. Thus they are black holes because they cannot be detected with optical telescopes. Although they are impossible to observe directly, over 90% of galaxies in the universe are said to harbor these perilous maws. In several previous Picture of the Day discussions about black holes and their influence on the universe, we determined that the descriptive terminology used by researchers is itself problematic, relying on highly speculative explanations derived from loose interpretations. Ambiguous lexical labels such as space-time, multiple universes, singularities, infinite density, and other ideas that are not quantifiable have introduced irony into what should be a realistic investigation into the nature of the universe. Scientists working with Chandra have also concluded that black holes can form with an intense electric field as they collapse into infinite darkness. It is thought that gamma-ray bursts are generated when the E field in a dying star is converted into electron and positron, antimatter electrons, pairs in less than a trillionth of a nanosecond. Copious groups of antiparticles interact and annihilate each other, releasing electromagnetic radiation that propagates outward at the speed of light. The extremely high light frequencies are seen as gamma-ray burst on Earth, along with an afterglow of ultraviolet and X-ray emissions. Since explosions of such magnitude are impossible under conventional models of matter and energy, the Chandra team has concluded that somehow something new must be added to the mix. That something is electric charge, although it is electric charge in a bizarre disguise. Gamma-ray observations imply matter and antimatter annihilation, but the formation of electron-positron pairs due to gravitational compaction is a theoretical fantasy. Another fictional source for the energetic phenomena we see in space is gravitational tides. Some flares in X-ray jets spewing from galaxies are thought to be caused by stars traveling too close to their central supermassive black holes, where they are torn apart by tidal forces. Most of the star's gas escapes the black hole, but a small quantity is captured by the immense gravity and forms a rotating disk. Closer to the black hole, heat generated by molecular collisions tears the atoms apart and the disk of gas glows in X-rays. When matter eventually falls into the black hole, gamma rays explosively burst out. It must be asked whether there is a consistent way to explain what we see in space, along with a way to demonstrate those explanations in the laboratory. X-rays and gamma rays in space are not created in gravity fields. Laboratory experiments most easily produce them by accelerating charged particles through an electric field. No gigantic masses compressed into tiny volumes are necessary, and they are easily generated with the proper experimental models. There are other factors that should be considered when analyzing data from space before resorting to super-dense objects and antimatter explosions as their cause. There is no experimental evidence that matter can be compressed to infinite density. How stars form supernovae is not clear. Supernovae do not form spherical shells when they explode. They form glowing bipolar plasma formations like an hourglass. No one knows what triggers a black hole to suddenly gobble up matter in its accretion disk within a few months. As we have noted in the past, Hannes Alfvén identified the exploding double layer as a new class of celestial object. It is double layers in space plasmas that form most of the unusual structures we see. Stellar explosions, jets, rings, and glowing clouds, these are all examples of electricity flowing through dusty plasma confined within Birkeland currents that stretch across light years. Compression zones, Z-pinches, in the plasma filaments form plasmoids that become the stars and galaxies. Electricity is responsible for the birth of stars, and when the current density gets too high, the double layers in the circuit catastrophically release their excess energy and appear as gamma-ray bursts or X-rays or flares of ultraviolet light. So, and to confirm that notion at the end of that article about electricity being the primary force that governs the formation of stars and the appearance of the various structures that we see in the cosmos, right, and how that is reproducible in a laboratory when we use the electric universe, model. And again, this model is still coming into being. Not all people within the electric universe field agree on all the points, but the main point is not seeing gravity as it's just their thing and it's just mass. Like, that's not an explanation, that's not a model, it's just a narrative, and it's a very short and pointless one at that. When we actually look at the electrical foundation of the effect and force that we're calling gravity, we can engineer that and we can reproduce that and we can test it in the lab, right? So David Lapointe, this is the primer fields. I've covered this in previous videos. These came out in 2012. David Lapointe has basically created stars in the laboratory by using magnetic field emitters facing one another, again creating this geometry that is conventionally associated with God, right? Yod-He, Vod-He, the force up and the force down, coming together and twisting, again forming a Z-pinch, right? Yahweh, Jehovah, is literally a description of the force that creates stars when you actually understand the geometry involved. And again, these things are all there in the words, but people get so caught in these dumb abstractions of concepts that they, these fantasies in their head, that they can't understand the very basic geometric models that underpins it all. And so basically, yeah, I encourage you guys to watch this. It's very interesting. Here he basically shows essentially how these magnetic fields converging, they create these structures. And so this is very easily a model for the structure of atoms, right? That atoms and galaxies are the same structure, which would again make sense in a fractal universe, as elucidated by scientific minds like Nassim Haramein, who is also very much in this sort of line of electromagnetic fractal reality that is all very explainable and doesn't rely on silly things like gravitational waves and space-time, curved space-time, or all the rest of it. And one other thing before we continue on to the last part is essentially I just want to show so basically he is creating stars in the laboratory. In a world that made sense, this guy would win the Nobel Prize, right? But the Nobel Prize is a fake prize for pseudoscientists mostly. I don't want to cast everybody down who's ever won a prize, but for the main part, all the Nobel Prizes are basically the councils that decide those, a bunch of quacks, a bunch of political committees. But yeah, so primer fields, very interesting to see how stars can be created in the laboratory and validate everything that we're talking about here, and the discarding of Einstein's relativity as a pseudoscience that doesn't actually produce technological bases for engineering. So this final one is by Stephen Crothers, who was referenced in one of the previous articles about disproving black holes mathematically. And this is kind of a summary of his argument in that regard. The most coherent rebuttal I've heard since, for years and years of covering these topics against Stephen Crothers is that he is a religious person. He's a Christian, and therefore his opinion, his math doesn't matter because he's a Christian, right? Math doesn't exist if you believe in God. That's what these people believe, right? These hard-nosed science people, that they can't read math and they can't read equations if it's from a person who believes that there's more than random chance governing the entire universe, right? So that goes to show you that a lot of the times when we're interacting with these people, debating these people, if you will, they are not operating in good faith. They are cult members. They are satanic materialists in their mind, and their prime reason is not to find truth. It's to find explanations for their own degeneracy, right? Because one of the things that you get to do in a purely material universe is get to be fundamentally unethical and unaccountable. Because if God doesn't exist, and truth doesn't exist, and objective knowledge doesn't exist, then what exists is only what people can prove. It's almost like a courtroom reality, right? If you can't prove it, then it's not real. So people think that they can do all sorts of unspeakable crimes and commit them against their fellow humans, and commit crimes against children. And as long as they don't get caught, they feel empowered by it. It's something that they get off on. And I've interacted with plenty of materialists, Satanists, just loser nerds that are all into NASA and Einstein relativity, and they listen to heavy metal music, and they're fat and they're unhealthy, and they believe hardcore in vaccines are the greatest thing that's ever been invented. And I just have no tolerance for them. I've indicated that in 1,000 videos at this point. Maybe not 1,000. We're on episode, what, 267? Anyway, continuing, final article of today, A Blind Man in a Dark Room Looking for a Black Hole That Isn't There, by Stephen Crothers. This was from 2012. He was responding to a paper, Formation of the Black Hole in Nova Scorpii. This was in 2002. And here's basically some Israeli scientists, and they're talking about how they're the binary black hole in Nova Scorpii, and they're putting together this model for how these binary black holes created, this supernova explosion. And just again, it's a good example of just layered assumptions. And the language becomes so convoluted and premised on other assumptions that it's basically nonsense. It's just a bunch of equations and just completely meaningless words. And again, I'm an English major. I know what all these words supposedly mean, but you put them all together, it's a word salad, and it's a math salad. It's got no relation to reality, and nobody can prove that it's correct. Nobody's observed a black hole, but they somehow govern 90% of the galaxies in this universe, right? It's all just a bunch of nonsense, and we get excoriated for questioning it and called flat earthers, right? Because the flat earthers are out here, saying a bunch of idiotic things, and the one thing that they're saying that's not idiotic is that gravity and Einstein are not complete. Well, gravity isn't complete and is a baseless pseudoscientific theory. And Einstein himself was a pedo who should be discarded on other reasons. But they're right about those things. The flat earthers are absolutely correct about that, but they're not correct about anything else. So anyway, this is Stephen Crothers responding to that. Brian Schmidt et al. Authored the paper Formation of the Black Hole in Nova Scorpii, the Astrophysical Journal, 2002, March 1st. An alleged black hole solution to Einstein's field equations pertain to a universe that only contains one mass, namely the mass of the black hole itself, by mathematical construction. There are no known solutions to the field equations for two or more black holes, and there is no existent theorem by which it can even be asserted that the field equations contain latent solutions for two or more black holes. In the model and analysis for Nova Scorpii, the authors have inadvertently applied the principle of superposition, where the principle of superposition does not apply. In Newton's theory of gravitation, the principle of superposition applies, and so one can simply pile up masses at will, although the gravitational interaction of those masses soon becomes intractable. In Einstein's theory, the gravitational field, manifest in the curvature of space-time, is coupled to its sources by the field equations, the sources being described by an appropriate energy-momentum tensor, and so the principle of superposition does not apply. This means that one cannot simply pile up masses in any given spacetime because the field equations must be solved for each and every configuration of matter proposed. The proposed model for Nova Scorpii has not done this. For instance, upon what energy-momentum tensor do the authors rely for the black hole close binary system, and hence upon what solution to the field equations do they rely for this binary system? There is in fact no known set of field equations for the model proposed by the authors for Nova Scorpii. The author's model begins with a Newtonian universe and ends with a non-Newtonian universe, manifest as an inadvertent blending of two different and incompatible theories by means of an inappropriate application of the principle of superposition, a Newtonian universe containing a non-Newtonian entity, a black hole, which is impossible. Or conversely, a relativistic universe that contains additional masses besides that of the black hole, which is also impossible, as paragraphs 1 and 2 above show. Owing to the foregoing, one cannot, by an analogy with Newton's gravitational theory, assert that black holes can exist in multitudes, merge or collide, or that a black hole can be a component of a binary system. According to Einstein, his principle of equivalence and his special relativity must hold in sufficiently small regions of his gravitational field, and these regions can be located anywhere in his gravitational field. Now a simple calculation proves that special relativity forbids infinite densities. Thus, an infinitely dense point mass singularity is forbidden by the theory of relativity no matter how it is alleged to be formed. It is worth noting that infinitely dense point mass singularities occur in Newton's gravitational theory too. They are merely centers of masses. But a center of mass is not a physical object. It is a mathematical artifice, nothing more. In the case of the black hole, the infinitely dense point mass singularity is claimed to be a real object. The subject paper does not clearly specify what type of black hole is allegedly formed in Nova Scorpii. The signatures of the simplest black hole, whether or not it is rotating, are an infinitely dense point mass singularity and an event horizon. Now it is an irrefutable fact that nobody has ever found an infinitely dense point mass singularity or an event horizon, and so nobody has ever assuredly found a black hole. This is not surprising, owing to paragraphs 1 to 5 above. Additionally, all reports of black holes being found in multitudes is wishful thinking due to a misapplication of the principle of superposition. The so-called Schwarzschild solution upon which black hole theory mostly relies is in actual fact not Schwarzschild's solution at all. Schwarzschild's actual solution forbids the black hole. One can easily confirm this by a reading of Schwarzschild's original paper on the subject. Unfortunately, most astronomers and astrophysicists are completely unaware of Schwarzschild's actual paper because it has become buried and all but forgotten in the literature, and the metric which bears his name has thereby become incorrectly associated with him. The Schwarzschild solution is due to David Hilbert and is a corruption of the original solution proposed by Schwarzschild. It is from Hilbert's corruption that the black hole was incorrectly spawned, as pointed out by the late American theoretical physicist Dr. Leonard S. Abrams. As an aside, paragraphs 3 above raises some other interesting and relevant issues. Scientists frequently assert that the escape velocity of a black hole is that of light and vacuum, and that nothing, not even light, can escape from the black hole. In fact, according to the same scientists, nothing, including light, can even leave the black hole. But there is already a serious problem with these claims. If the escape velocity of a black hole is that of light in a vacuum, then light, on one hand, can escape. On the other hand, light is allegedly not able to even leave the black hole, so the black hole has no escape velocity. If the escape velocity of the black hole is that of light in vacuum, not only can light both leave and escape, material objects can also leave the event horizon, but not escape, even though according to this theory of special relativity, they can only have a velocity less than that of light in vacuum. This just means that if the black hole has an escape velocity, then material bodies can in fact leave the black hole, and eventually stop and fall back to the black hole, just like a ball thrown into the air here on Earth with an initial velocity less than the escape velocity for the Earth. So the properties of the alleged black hole event horizon are irretrievably contradictory. it has also become commonplace in the literature and in textbooks for students to claim that Newton's theory predicts the existence of a kind of black hole. But the black hole is not predicted by Newton's theory of gravitation either, despite the claims of the astrophysical scientists that the theoretical Mitchell-Laplace dark body is a kind of black hole. The Mitchell-Laplace dark body possesses an escape velocity, whereas the black hole has no escape velocity. It does not require irresistible gravitational collapse to form, whereas the black hole does. It has no infinitely dense point mass singularity, whereas the black hole does. It has no event horizon, whereas the black hole does. There is always a class of observers that can see the dark body, as the late British astronomer G.C. McVitie pointed out, but there is no class of observers that can see the black hole. The Mitchell-Laplace dark body can persist in a place which contains other masses and interact with those masses, but the space-time of the black hole is devoid of masses other than that of the black hole itself, by mathematical construction, and so it cannot interact with any other masses. Thus, the Mitchell-Laplace dark body does not possess the signatures of the alleged black hole, and so it is not a black hole. Additionally, escape velocity is a two-body concept. One body escapes from another body. But as pointed out above, there are no known solutions to Einstein's field equations for two or more bodies, and no existence theorem by which it can be asserted that his field equations contain latent solutions for two or more masses. A very simple proof of the Mitchell-Laplace dark body is not a black hole is given by G.C. McVitie, The Observatory, 1978. That is the end of the article by Stephen J. Crothers. And essentially, I mean, I'm not an astrophysicist, I'm not a mathematician, I never even took calculus because it cut into my drinking schedule in high school. But I did excel in all the other scientific, classes that I took. And for me, just mathematically, having an infinite mass, right, what does that even mean? What do you do with an infinite mass? How does that exist in an engineering, in a real, tangible universe with objective knowledge? How can infinite mass exist? It makes no sense, right? Whereas in the electric universe, if we see the forces and we don't have to reduce it all to cos mass and gravity and gases, right? We can look at the charged particles, the flows of charged particles known as Birkeland currents, which are moving all throughout the cosmos. And when we factor in electricity and magnetism, again, the electric universe, gravity as an electromagnetic phenomenon, super stupid, as Anthony Cumia suggests, right? Because it's a flat Earth concept. Do you really start to see what the game is here and how they're playing with your mind and how they're trying to create this storm of bullshit around something that is a very core seed of truth and is very, very, very important towards moving forward into this sixth world? Because one thing that will define sixth world, the Aquarian age, if you will, I prefer sixth world, sounds a lot less fruity, but it is free energy, right? We will bring this planet into alignment with the higher forces and, resonances and, vibrations, if you will, of this universe through the proper application of the cosmic force, of the ether itself. And we will have free energy on this planet. We will bring all the people out of poverty and, things like the universal basic income really don't sound as crazy when you have a universal energy propagation platform. And again, what Tesla was working on, the Wardenclyffe Tower, was going deep into the earth and anchoring itself not just in the electrically conductive rock of the crust of the earth, of the planet, but also the water that was within the crust. He was very much in tune with the structure of this planet electrically. And what he was intending to do, yes, he was burning coal. People have no idea what he was trying to do and try and dismiss it in their idiot just ignorance. Oh, he was burning coal, to transmit wirelessly. Yes, but the point was you create an energetic influx into the Earth's own crust, which is a massive conductor. And the Earth, with its own electric pulse, can be induced with a constructive current to produce, you can transmit electric loads as well as signals through the crust of the Earth. And that is what Tesla was trying to do. So as we debate rolling out 5G nonsense and having a billion different towers just microwaving our DNA into oblivion, remember that the crust of the Earth is a giant conductor, and signal and load transmission is possible through the crust of the Earth on a global scale. And that is what Tesla was working on, not this fruitcake Elon Musk and his broken down cars that blow up and crash into barriers every single Thursday. Seems like more often than that. Nikola Tesla was a genius. Watch The Current War. It only features him in a minor role, but it is good to see it was only 100 years ago, just a little bit more, that alternating and direct current were new advent into this world. And, there was this revolution taking place, and it stopped. It stopped because of Einstein. It stopped because of relativity. And I'm here to pick up that, pick up that mass and keep moving it forward, even without the super letters after my name. I'm a super scientist. I don't give a shit, okay? I'm a smart person. I can see illogic and logic wherever it exists, right? Because I know how language works, and I can see where people try and hide things. Relativity is trying to hide a lot of things. These electric universe guys are on the path of truth. They're genuinely trying to figure out what it is. And I'll tell you what, it's not black holes. This is a pretty picture, but this isn't science, my friend. It's not at all. But on that note, that's my video today, hour long. Happy New Year, everybody. It's going to be a fun year if you're in alignment and ready to see what comes. But if you're holding on to the structures of the old world, I encourage you to do some soul searching and find ways to let that go and have a constructive, arm's length distant relationship with those people and concepts in your life that you still feel unhealthily attached to. So that's it. Hope you all have a great New Year's Eve, and I'll see you next year and next decade. Cheers.